When Bioshock first introduces you to the underwater city of Rapture and lays the groundwork for its story, it is also simultaneously showing the player the unfortunate ending of a different story, that of Rapture itself, and the man responsible for its creation and destruction. Aiming to escape the oppressive and destructive powers of the outside world and armed only with objectivist ideals and immeasurable wealth, Andrew Ryan slaved away for many years to build his underwater utopia and populate it with the brightest minds and most eccentric personalities he could find. And though his city appeared to be thriving at first, his growing conflict with the opportunistic conman Frank Fontaine and the unchecked distribution of Adam-derived genetic enhancements would ensure the slow but certain demise of Ryan's capitalist dream. By the time Bioshock's story begins, the dream of Rapture is essentially dead in the water. As the player is welcomed into this almost unfathomable underwater world, then the game's overarching premise is tactfully rendered on a smaller canvas. You are told about the dream of Rapture by the voice of Andrew Ryan himself. You are introduced to the ideology and the grandeur of its actualization, and then you are presented with the tragic aftermath. While Bioshock is a game with several layers of interesting themes, it is, at its core, and in my opinion, a story about the chains that bind us to grim fates, be they ideological, physical, psychological, or tattooed on your wrists. And while the game's ending doesn't quite tie up its protagonist's journey with a neat little bow, Bioshock does prove out its premise within the first hour in the opening sequence alone. Now, would you kindly watch the rest of this video so I can explain exactly how Bioshock's beginning benefits from being Rapture's ending, as it demonstrates the conflict of ideals versus reality and freedom versus fate.
They told me, son, you're special. You were born to do great things.
The story of Bioshock begins in 1960 on a transatlantic Apollo Airways flight, as the player assumes the role of the game's peculiar protagonist, Jack. And because Jack is an incredibly hip and cool guy in a time before airlines banned smoking on flights, obviously he's wearing a fisherman's jumper and smoking a cigarette as he glances at a picture of his apparent parents and the beautifully wrapped gift they presumably gave him. Though Jack will remain silent for the rest of the game, here at the beginning he does have a few words to say about how special his apparent parents apparently thought he was. No sooner than he finishes musing to himself, though, does the screen suddenly fade to black, as harrowing screams and obvious plane crashing into the ocean sounds abound. Because sure enough, after the opening title has come and gone, Jack will find himself gasping for breath beneath the water, surrounded by wreckage and seemingly somehow the only survivor. After swimming to the surface, the player will see past the flaming debris towards an inexplicable lighthouse, sitting proudly in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And rather than drown or be cut apart by a rogue propeller, most players will sensibly make their way toward the stairs at the base of this odd structure. As you enter the lighthouse through the open front door, bright lights come to life to illuminate the atrium and the imposing metallic bust of Andrew Ryan, as he hovers over you with a banner beneath him reading "No gods or kings, only man." If at this point you start to wonder whether this mission statement could have been more effectively delivered without the giant bronze effigy of the man in charge, you're probably on the right track to understanding what's going on here. As you step forward and listen closely, the faint sound of a big band cover of Charles Tremet's La Mer, or Beyond the Sea, can be heard playing in the background. And as you make your way further inside, perhaps noticing that the door has shut closed behind you, more lights will flicker on to guide you along your path, and the music will grow louder. Descending the opulent stairway, you will set eyes upon the bathysphere, a small luxurious submersible with a single lever at the back, which also serves as the first opportunity the player has to directly interact with the world. After pulling that lever, the bathysphere will descend slowly, 10 fathoms past an Art Deco sculpture, then 18 fathoms, before a white panel ascends from the floor, blocking the window, and a projector turns on, offering a brief sponsored segment for the Ryan Industries plasmid Incinerate. And then the player hears from the man himself, Andrew Ryan, as he presents a summarized version of the objectivist dream of Rapture. He asks you, is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? And before you have a chance to answer, he tells you the solution, which is apparently Rapture. As the screen descends into the floor, the view through the window is restored, and the music swells with intensity as the bathysphere glides over a rocky surface to reveal the full majesty of the underwater city. Squids and jellyfish and turtles and whales swim past as bright neon advertises everything from cocktails to casinos, and from fashion to fine art. The lights may be flickering and the joints of the sea scrapers creaking, but there is no denying the grandeur of Rapture, and the apparent fulfillment of the vision that Andrew Ryan continues to speak of as you approach your arrival station. With just a brief recorded speech and a few projected images, Bioshock tells the player everything they need to know to understand how and why Rapture came to be, and the city's dramatic reveal is cleverly contextualized by the echoes of the horrific plane crash to underscore a vague feeling of dread throughout. There will be plenty of nuance to come and many secrets to uncover, but the fundamentals of the premise are all here at the start of the game. The city was built around a strict ideology by an egotistical and stubborn man, and its fate would always be tied to that vision. To explain his image of a perfect society, Andrew Ryan would often use the metaphor of the Great Chain, in which every person or every link in the chain serves their role and they are all united in moving towards a greater purpose, or at least whatever purpose is chosen by the consensus. The fates of everyone in the chain are tied together for better or worse. Andrew Ryan's philosophy is built around capitalist values and an insistence on personal freedom. So it's interesting that he would gravitate towards using a chain to symbolize his perfect version of a functioning civilization. But it's also not entirely incongruous. Ryan may tell the player that a man chooses and a slave obeys, but in the end, his inflexibility and his ego made him a slave to his own ideals. He may extol the virtues of freedom, but he also inadvertently built a cage for himself and all those that would venture to follow him to the bottom of the ocean. Because by the time your bathysphere arrives, the dream of Rapture has well and truly died.
I didn't mean no trespass. Just don't hurt me. Just let me go. Just give me my gun.
As the bathysphere floats up and into the arrival station, a few more flickering lights illuminate a disturbing scene just ahead of the player. The same window which had, just moments before, shown you the immense beauty of Rapture now presents a horror show. Marble flooring and ornate banisters set the stage for an encounter between a whimpering, unarmed man and a monstrous splicer. These mangled, distorted humanoids, who the player will get to know quite well throughout their journey, were born of excessive use of Adam, the strange genetic genetic substance harvested from sea slugs and processed into plasmids before being sold and distributed throughout the underwater city. Though these details are not obvious at the very beginning of the game, it is entirely clear from the get-go that Andrew Ryan's objectivist fantasy has ultimately led his society down a dark and unalterable path. By the time the player is welcomed to Rapture, Andrew Ryan's utopia has become a hellscape. Rapture's story is ending just as the player's is beginning. As the unarmed stranger is sliced open with glowing meat hooks before your very eyes, it becomes alarmingly apparent that this violent splicer has turned their attention towards the bathysphere, as they whisper with haunting eagerness,
"Is it someone new?"
Then they clamber aboard the submersible and thrash about in the dark for a moment before giving up, jumping back off and soaring into the rafters ahead of you. As the player starts to regret not drowning at the start of the game, a voice emerges from a shortwave radio nearby with a familiar, seemingly innocuous phrase.
Would you kindly pick up that shortwave radio?
Speaking through that radio is a man named Atlas who presumably likes to shrug and swears that he will keep Jack alive in return ultimately for help rescuing his family. As you leave the bathysphere and start to explore Rapture, you'll pick up a wrench to help deal with the splicers, and soon enough you'll get your first taste of Adam when you make use of an electrobolt plasmid. After some momentary discomfort, you'll awake with the power to shoot lightning from your fingertips. But not before you watch some splicers consider slicing you open and a big daddy and little sister pass by to say hello. As you head deeper into the city of Rapture, you'll learn to fight and survive as you witness the various horrors of this objectivist utopia. Though the lifeblood of Rapture may have been money, this hideous new world forged from the remains of Andrew Ryan's paradise runs instead on Adam. The Big Daddies, former maintenance workers, protect the little sisters as they harvest the strange genetic substance, while the splicers throughout the city fight to acquire any Adam they can find so that they can get back to splicing. Andrew Ryan's ideological dedication may have built a city beyond belief, but it also slowly transformed that civilized society into a terribly uncivilized dog-eat-dog ecosystem. In essence, Ryan built the chains that would tie him and Rapture to its tragic fate. And this premise, as presented in brief during the game's opening sequence, is also the story of Bioshock's protagonist, Jack, who is chained to his own path by his very design. Though the truth is obviously concealed during the game's opening missions, it will eventually be revealed late in the game that Jack is the illegitimate child of Andrew Ryan and an Eve's Garden dancer, who was forcefully aged with experimental pharmaceuticals and brainwashed to believe he had lived a life outside of Rapture, as ordered by Frank Fontaine, aka Atlas. And, of course, he was conditioned to respond to the phrase, "Would you kindly," by acting out any given instructions, including hijacking and crashing the plane at the beginning of the story with the gun that was so lovingly wrapped up and gifted to him in order to reach the lighthouse and re-enter Rapture. From the very start, then, just as the chains on his wrist would suggest, Jack is tied to his fate, forced to follow the instructions he is given at every stage throughout the story. In my opinion, the reveal that Jack has been programmed and most of his choices predetermined is made less meaningful by the 3 or really 2 possible endings to the game. which result from the player's decision to save or not save the little sisters by harvesting Adam. One ending suggests that Jack was a merciless villain, and the other suggests he was somehow a loving father figure all along, and neither one feels naturally connected to the thematic direction of the story. That said, these endings are not bad enough to detract from the game's excellent twist and the core premise, because the illusion of choice is still very well represented by the many apparent decisions Jack faces throughout his journey into the heart of Rapture. Aside from functioning as an obvious commentary on the deterministic nature of such game narratives, Jack's story also encourages the player to wonder about the nature of free will itself, and how all of our actions are determined to some degree by our mental and physical ties. And in my mind, this story is made all the more effective because Jack's chains within the narrative are directly proportional to Rapture itself. Andrew Ryan built this cage defined by rules which would ensure only one possible outcome, just as Fontaine essentially built Jack to follow his own dark path. Whenever we tie ourselves to any road that leads us away from our humanity, whenever we attach ourselves to ideology which prevents us from adapting to the chaos of an evolving world, we are necessarily doomed to a singular fate then. In Bioshock's first hour, the game quickly sells you on humanity's incredible ability to achieve great things, and their capacity for monumentally screwing those things up. You are introduced to the objectivist ideology and the grandeur of that dream, and then you are swiftly presented with the tragic results. And then you go on to live out your own tragically predetermined fate. But what did you take away from Bioshock's story and its fantastic opening? Let me know in the comments, and would you kindly like and subscribe if you'd like to hear me talk more stories and more games. Otherwise, I'll see you next time around.